Good day, and welcome to episode 60 of the Aaron Wayne podcast. Can you hear the sultry sound of my voice? I lost my voice over the last week, and lost it in the middle of a yoga class. Got to the end of the yoga class, everybody was in Shavasana, and I had the urge to cough, and it would have been the most disrupting thing if I were to just go while everybody was trying to chill out in Shavasana. Change the camera angle a little bit. I gotta tell you, whenever I do this podcast, I fiddle with everything. I just tinker, and move this, move that, change the lights. I need to come up with something that's just like plug and play, just get it started. But yeah, man, excited to be back. Actually, honestly, I'm not excited to be doing the podcast right now. I want to go to sleep. Your boy wants to go sleepy. I want to keep doing this because I enjoy doing it. My kids found out. So I've talked about it before. I'm a public school teacher, and my kids found out about the podcast. So, hi guys. I don't know what to do about it, but my wife's upstairs. You can hear it. It's like I think I should probably wake up at like 1 a.m. and do this when the house is totally silent, or just spend the money on a podcast space where it's like things are soundproofed. But who's got the time? I don't even have the time to record the darn thing. But yeah, so my kids found the podcast, and it's a slightly strange feeling because last year a couple kids were like, "Mr. Ridges, do you have a podcast?" Oh my god, I hit the microphone. Obviously not professionally, but they and then it kind of floundered. I just didn't like stoke it, and kind of floundered. But it keeps coming up this year for some reason, and it doesn't bother me. It's kind of weird. I actually didn't even plan on talking about this today. I guess it's just on my mind because came up after school today. But I think I stand by. Obviously, this is not within the professional capacity of being a public school teacher. This is a thing I do because I can't stop talking. I can't stop teaching. So I just like learning stuff and talking. And I've come to find in my adult life that I have a lot of good friends, but not everybody is ready to talk about the things that I want to talk about. And I don't want to just take everybody's conversation time and just blabber on about declining birth rates. I just watched this thing today. Declining birth rates are 70% of industrialized countries don't have a replacement birth rate, meaning that there aren't 2 people being born for every 2 people that are getting married or not getting married, right? However that plays out. But for every adult, there isn't a child to replace them. In fact, because they do it, the way that they study this, I'll get back to my point and then I'll get to this point. I have this podcast as a form of recreation for myself, and because it keeps building, which is crazy. Like, you wouldn't know it from looking at YouTube. In fact, the video I posted for this week's podcast, which when you listen to this will be last week's podcast, I got a copyright claim on it because there was like some strange thing happening with the intro music. So if the intro felt it a little bit disjointed, it's because I couldn't hit the soundboard, right? Maybe this is mine. I can hit a little applause. I can do one of these. But like, I don't, those are just like the ones that come with the Zoomcast thing. But so I can't do the audio. That's why I was a little disjointed. And obviously I lost my entire train of thought of what the hell I was talking about. Let me just like throw a flat disclaimer right here, because I am a public school teacher and I have a responsibility in the public. And now that more of my kids are finding out that I have this thing, I should just say, like, this is definitely distinct from my role as a public school teacher, and this is not the manner in which I speak in a public school setting. In fact, if you listen back to old episodes, when the public lens began to scrutinize public school teachers a bit more on what they did or did not display, what they did or did not say, what people perceived was or was not happening from public school teachers, and rightfully so. Like parents they shouldn't be concerned, because the connotation of that implies that like they should be worried about what teachers are teaching them, but they should be engaged with what it is that teachers are. I have a daughter, I would like to know that my daughter is being taught things that I see as truthful, and maybe that means that I just need to be a bit more involved, but not so looking at everything with such a critical lens. Punchline is this: I very distinctly have a different role as a podcaster and a yoga teacher. All of these things I do blend well together through my skill sets and my interests. All of them are just teaching. It's just I found different paths in order to learn as much as I can, which I think was instilled in me from my parents, but really from my grandparents. And my grandpa is going through some hard times right now because he's like 175 years old. Like, so it's like, it's sad, but he has lived an amazing life. But he really instilled in me, and my grandmother too, the desire to learn, even though I was a poor student, and the role that I have as a public schools teacher. I didn't mean to harp on this. I've already done like 7 minutes on this, and I'm not doing a long podcast. So if you're still here, you're still here. I'll get back to the birth rate thing. And I also want to talk about video games because I've been thinking about this a lot. I actually read this really interesting article. So I don't talk about the podcast in school because it would be very strange for me to be like, hey guys, by the way, Mr. Bridges is a podcast. Go ahead, pull up your computers and subscribe to, and like, it just seems, I think it's unethical, right? I follow my own ethics, not necessarily, but for sure it's somewhere like the rules of school that I sign on my contract would definitely say that would be, it should be interpreted as inappropriate if a teacher is like, go follow my TikTok account or go follow my Instagram. Like if a teacher's doing that in a public school setting. So I just kind of like push it to the side. And whenever it comes up, I'm like, yeah. I like to build things. The response I gave is like, I like to build things. I like to communicate. I like to learn, and I like to teach. And this is just another avenue that I do, but it's definitely distinct from my role as a public school teacher. So I don't really talk about it at school. Good. Got that out of the way, because eventually what's going to happen is some kid is going to be watching this podcast or listening to it, and their parents are going to be like, what are you listening to? Are you listening to a man in his 30s ramble in his basement while his dog clambers around upstairs and he watches his baby on a baby monitor? That's weird. And then they're going to look at the podcast, which I welcome, right? I stand by my, who I am and how I've represented myself in the community. So yeah, enough about that. I really did not intend on talking about this at all. What I wanted to talk about was video games, which I'll get to in a second. But to close the loop on this birth rate thing, I just watched this documentary on it, and I was listening to a podcast called Modern Wisdom with a guy named Chris Williams or Williamson. I'm not sure. I think he's like the next generation of the Rogan phenomenon, which is smart, compassionate people. Particularly like traditionally masculine men that are also loving and caring, but he's like the next generation of it. He's like the millennial taking over, because there's a lot in Rogan that you could like listen to his podcast. You're like, oh my God, you said that, or I disagree with this, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, he's the largest like individual within the media ecosystem potentially ever that's ever existed. So, Rogan always gets the best guests and stuff. So I listen to his podcast, but this Chris Williamson guy, he is way more subtle, definitely more well-read, and approaches his podcast with a real sense of intent. And I hope to emulate that as I get more consistent with getting back into the swing of this, which, I'm going to call the last 30 days fairly successful when it comes to this stuff for me. So now that I have routines down, then I can start to develop a bit more higher quality of like, because I'm always learning and I'm always just talking extemporaneously about the things that I'm learning, but I'd like to try and like focus these things. And the last podcast was absolute dog do, because I was like, okay, Aaron, take this more seriously. Be like, see all these people, they theme their things and they work on it within the structure of a theme. And I turned it into this like really cheesy, like it was like a BuzzFeed article or something, of which BuzzFeed just like laid off all of their writers and is just going to write articles with ChatGPT, which is like the first domino to fall. Now, I'll put something together on my thoughts on AI and education sometime soon, because I'm actually trying to figure these ideas out, and I've like sort of enlisted, not enlisted, it's like in an informal way, have brought up in conversation some of my students that I know are likely either going to use and abuse this software, but nonetheless are aware that AI can do a lot of this stuff. But more importantly, like, I think like the kids that I'm trying to get feedback from are going to have, I think that they'll have a way, if they can articulate it, they'll have a way to teach me how to teach the other kids that they shouldn't just run everything through an AI. So I'll put something together on that later. But the birth rate thing, back to Chris Williams, this is like tangential, which is like, that's how I do this. That's why I wanted to try and focus it last time, but it just became so cheesy. So I just need to, instead of grabbing from all the, frenetic wires in my brain, I need to just pull the things in that I'm reading and listening to, and then kind of organize them. Because I don't know. I mean, I get feedback, I get comments and like stuff in DMs. Like I get all these messages and stuff. They're like, people say, oh, because I've made this commentary to myself multiple times in 60 episodes of I need to be more focused. And people are like, no, I actually kind of like it when you're just kind of rambling and pulling things together. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a blend between the two. But nonetheless, this birth rate thing, back to this. On Chris Williamson's podcast, I had seen a guy named Peter Zeihan. I read his book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. It's all about demographics and how that's going to change the sort of layout of geopolitical power. And, everybody's assuming like the rise of China and, Russia invading into Europe and all of those like are legitimate things to be concerned with. But demographically, their population won't be able to replace the aging population. So, if you've got two baskets and call it three baskets, babies, people of producing age, like my age and into your 60s, and then everybody in third basket, 60s and above, if those three baskets aren't weighted evenly, you move out of one into the next, and then out of the middle one and into the third. And so if you don't have somebody continually filling that baby basket, then they don't move up the generations. And so at some point, you end up having a massive basket of people that aren't in their producing ages any longer, and they're sort of consuming the fruits of their labor over 7 decades through either Social Security or their retirement, and they're starting to pull money out of the stock market if they plan properly, and or pulling money from their Social Security benefits that have been accrued through their payroll throughout their lifetime, which do both is ideal, but nonetheless, they're pulling money out of the system and consuming without producing back into the system. So the millennial generation is a really interesting generation, because we have the boomers that are like retiring and going into their latter decades, and which means they'll be consuming without producing. So there's going to be a higher level of stress on the millennial generation to produce. The generation that when I was in my 20s, everybody said these guys are dopes. They don't know what they're doing. They're just playing on Facebook all day and, playing video games, which I'm going to get to the video game thing in a second. But the real problem, and, millennials, I think, have stepped up to the plate. But the real problem is the fact that millennials, because so much of their maturity was delayed, because, living in a hyper-industrialized country with, relative economic stability. Even the poorest people in this country have a cell phone and a flat screen TV. 15 years ago, flat screen TV was $1,000, right? That's capitalism. That's how that works. And so the generation is kind of stepping up to the plate now, but in so doing, they're having fewer kids, and not fewer kids. This is the thing. So like my wife and I may have one kid. We may have 3 kids. We don't know yet, but the amount of childless people in their 30s has dramatically increased. And this is one of the things from a different podcast guest. I'm just going to do a recap of Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom. But he had a second guest that came on that talked specifically about the birth rate problem. And I watched that guy's documentary this afternoon, and I think I recall from the doc, I don't even know the name of it. I should put it in the show notes, but let me make a note of this so I don't forget. But by the age of 30, for the first time in history, there are more women without children than there are women with children at the age of 30. I mean, and then another, let me just jot this note out. Another really interesting number that I came to is, of all of the women who make it to whatever the age was, like say 40s, just for the sake of argument, of all of the women who make it to the age of 40 that don't have children, 80% of them wanted to have children. And the reasons that they gave that they didn't is either because it gets harder as you get into your 30s, and there's, educate yourself or watch this documentary that I'll put in the show notes, but also like finding a compatible and worthwhile mate to have kids with. And so what I see is this smaller generation of people who have been tasked with trying to create a replacement population, which many people say is like, well, we already have too many people on the planet. It's like, that's the wrong way to think about this, because you just search population bomb and counter argument, because I don't have time to go into all of it. Maybe I'll make like a whole thing on this. I want to start pulling people back in for interviews. I was doing that before and I was enjoying that. So maybe I'd find, if you know somebody, throw it in the comments or DM me online. But if we don't have a replacement population, then we excessively tax the working population in order to support the aging population. And then underneath, it's just a cascading problem that actually operates in the true mathematical sense of the term exponential. It's an exponential increase in the amount of kids that are not being born that ought to have been born. I haven't even talked about the video game thing, but these tie together because I learned recently that the average male between the ages of 18 to 30 spends roughly 2,000 hours a year playing video games. 2,000 hours a year. A work week, if you take no vacations, is like, what's that, 2,080? So 52 times 40, 2,080 hours a year. So a full-time job. So that means that the average military age male between the ages of 18 to 30 is spending a full year of work just playing video games. And that's going to have devastating impact on, my wife opened the door to the basement. She knows I'm down here podcasting. So what are we going to do? I don't know. But I do know that my wife opening the door probably means that she wants me to come upstairs. The tone, something I teach my students, tone is the manner in which you say something, but a writer can't say it. They have to use their words. But I just said it. I wanted to finish this thinking, but I can tell just by her leaving the door cracked that she wants me to come upstairs. But she's not going to hear my, dissatisfied tone because she doesn't listen to my podcast. Yeah, she left the door open. Okay. All right. Well, got it done. How about that? All right, guys. I'm losing my voice anyway. It's time for bed. Comment, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Hit the thumbs up. All the things that, if you're still listening to this, just, it costs you nothing. And the thing continues to grow. And I'm tracking the growth. And I want to see that like that up line. Do you know what I mean? I want to see what that looks like. Because I'm spreading good vibes, guys. I'm not out here trying to make money. See previous podcasts. I've talked about this many times. I just want to be able to be a force for good on the internet because there's a lot of bullshit out there. And I actually just bought a book. Let me finish my thought. I can still see her like walking past the door. I just bought a book by a scholar. I think he's from Cambridge. And the title of the book is called On Bullshit. Kind of like how you would have like, what is that Aristotle piece? I don't know. That's like a thing they do. They just use, like people that do philosophy, they'd like use the preposition on or for. And it's like for the sciences or on academia. This one is on bullshit. Movie recording has been stopped automatically. The card is full. Okay. That means, and I probably tried to walk myself into cueing the outro music. And then I just kept rambling. So, what are you going to do about it? All right, guys. Peace out.